everyone, welcome to my new series. This is Scale Skills Preparatory Level. And just a reminder, I did do a short introduction video about this series and this book. So you might want to check that out before proceeding into this lesson. That introduction video will just give you some tips on how to practice, how much to practice, when to practice the pages in this book. It'll also explain a little bit about why you might want to be looking into this series and the benefits of it. All right, so now we're in page 2, and this is C major. Everything that you're playing today on page 2 is within a key called C major. Now, if you're unfamiliar with C major and what that means, the easiest way to look at it is it's basically going to be all the white keys on the piano. All right, so now we're not going to all play all the white keys on the piano, but a more specific way to look at it is if you start on C and you play all the white keys to the next C, whether you're going up or down. So that's, a simpler version of looking at the key of C major. And if I play all these notes in between C and C, that is called a scale, which we'll actually get to here shortly. But first, before a scale, we're going to look at the top line, which is 5-finger position and the 1 chord. So what I'm going to do is just look at hands separate first. I'm going to start with the treble clef, which is our right hand. And so what you're going to do is you're going to put your thumb on middle C. Okay, this is going to be our 5-finger position. Thumb on C, 2 on D, 3 on E, 4 on F, and 5 on G. And you're not going to move your hand or your fingers from those 5 keys. If you look at the music before we get started, it also tells us our time signature at the very beginning. So next to the treble clef, we see 2 numbers, 4 and 4, stacked vertically on top of each other. So the top 4 is really the important one, at least for this series. That tells us how many beats per measure. So every measure's got 4 beats. Now the bottom 4 is actually really important, but that's not going to change really, I don't think, ever in this series. The bottom 4 just means the quarter note gets 1 beat. Okay, so if we take a look at the music there, you can see the first measure has 4 quarter notes, so there's 4 beats. Next measure has 4 quarter notes, there's 4 beats. Your third measure has a dotted half note, and then there's a quarter rest. Now let's stop right there before we even get to our very last measure, because our very last measure is something different. The first 3 measures are going from the 5-finger position. And basically the 5 notes I just played for you a second ago are the first 5 notes of this 5-finger position. So again, from the beginning, we've got 1 on C, 2 on D, 3 on E, 4 on F, 5 on G. And you're going to come back down to F, E, D, and C. And that last C that you're playing on measure 3 is 3 counts because it's a dotted half note. So as you play these examples, it doesn't matter if you go fast or slow. What matters is, of course, accuracy, the right notes and fingering, but evenness. So really, it does matter if you go fast or slow. You're going to want to go as slow as it takes to make sure not only you have the right notes, but you have evenness, a steady tempo. Like a heartbeat or like a tick-tock on a clock, it's steady. That's really important as you do pretty much everything in this book. So one more time from the beginning, starting on middle C, it's C, D, E, F, G, F, E, D, and then C for 1, 2, 3, rest on beat 4. Your left hand is going to be down here, 1 octave lower than middle C. So here's middle C with my right hand. Here's C an octave lower in my left hand. Notice, obviously, it's my 5th finger. So 5 on C, 4 on D, 3 on E, 2 on F, and thumb on G. And those are the first 5 notes of this pattern. And you may recognize that, hey, that was the same pattern you played in the right hand, which is correct. So let's look at the left hand once again, starting with 5 on C. So we've got C, D, E, F, G, back down to F, E, D, and then C, 1, 2, 3, off on beat 4. So you're playing the exact same thing in both hands. It just feels different because of the fingering. So now, once you feel comfortable doing them hands separate, we're going to put them hands together. Now let's just give it a little count off as we do that. 1, 2, ready, go. 1, 2, 3, off on beat 4. So that's the 5-finger position, hands together. On the very last measure, you have, it says at the very top there, the 1 chord. Now, what is the 1 chord? In the key of C major, the 1 chord is a C chord. So if you've got something called a scale, which we'll get to in just a second, I mentioned all those notes earlier, your very first note of a C scale is a C. So the 1 chord is the chord built off of the first note of the scale. So if the first note of the scale is a C, you're going to build a C chord. And a C chord is a C, an E, and a G. C, E, and G. And the fingering is pretty obvious. 1, 3, and 5 in the right hand. In the left hand, it's 5, 3, and 1. So the last measure, we're playing our 1 chord in the key of C, which is a C chord. And you're going to hit both hands together, and it's 4 counts because it's a whole note. So here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Obviously make it the same tempo that you played the previous 3 measures. Now that quarter rest was there, so it gives you just a little bit of time to find your fingering and your notes for that C chord before you play it. So they're being very generous, giving you that 4th beat of rest right there in the previous measure. Okay, so here we go. Let's go ahead and play the entire line with the count off. 1, 2, ready, go. 1, 2, 3, rest. 1, 2, 3, 4, and you're done. So that takes care of the first line, the 5-finger position and the 1 chord, which is C. Now, the second line, this is the scale that I was talking about earlier. So the scale is basically C to C and all the white keys in between. But we're going to incorporate both hands on this scale. I played it a second ago with 1 hand. Don't try to do this yet. That's for another day, another lesson. We're going to make it easier. We're going to split the hands in 2. So we're not going to split the hands in 2. We're going to split the scale between 2 hands. That sounds better. So the bass clef is what this is written in. Okay, so you're going to start with your left hand. Your 5th finger's on C, your 4th finger's on D, 3 on E, 2 on F. That's the first measure right there. Okay, those are the first 4 notes. Look at your second measure. It says R, H, and a 2. So your second finger is going to play the next note, which is G. And then 3 on A, 4 on B, 5 on C. That feels probably a little uncomfortable, a little tight, because look at my thumbs. I'm not even using them, and they're kind of butting up against each other. But you can put one above the other. Okay? So you're really using those 4 fingers and those 4 fingers in your left hand and in your right hand. Okay, so a total of 8 notes, 4 and 4. So where it says tetrachord form underneath the word scale, that's what you're playing. A tetrachord is these 4 notes and these 4 notes. Now, if you really want to know why or what exactly makes those 4 notes a tetrachord, it's simple. C to D is a whole step. I've skipped a key on the piano. I've skipped a black key. That's a whole step. D to E is another whole step. I just skipped a black key. E to F is a half step. I didn't skip any keys. So a tetrachord is 4 notes formed by a whole step, and half step. Now this in the right hand is also a tetrachord. So remember, a tetrachord has to be 4 notes, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the pattern is whole step, half step. So G to A is a whole step. I just skipped a black key. A to B is a whole step. I skipped a black key. B to C is a half step. I didn't skip any keys. So yes, that is also a tetrachord. So in case you're wondering, that's what a tetrachord is. And all scales, not just C major, but all, I should say, major scales, to be specific, are formed of 2 tetrachords. All right, so the entire line consists of ascending, going up the scale. And once you hit middle C, you're going to come right back down. And don't move your hands or your fingers, because you're going to use those same fingers on those same notes going up and down. And it is also in 4/4 time. So I think now we're ready to do a count off and play through this example. 1, 2, ready, go. And notice your last note's a half note, so that's going to be held on beats 3 and 4. So I'm just playing it at a specific tempo, but you can feel free to play it faster. If this is too fast for you, feel free to play it slower. Like I said, accuracy first, and that includes evenness. But if you feel like I could play it faster and even, go for it, because eventually that is the goal, to do these faster. But you got to make sure you learn the basics first. All right, so that takes care of the scale. The third line down is a chord progression. Now the first 2 measures, they say root position. Okay, so the 1 chord, if you recall, is C major. And I'm just going to do the right hand here. We already did that earlier at the top. C major is the 1 chord. It's built off the first note of the scale. Now underneath those chords, the C chords, you can see there's a Roman numeral 1. Now the second chord is a G chord, which is way up here. G, B, and D. Notice my fingering didn't change. 1, 3, and 5. Notice that it's really the same pattern as a C chord. Skips, right? A lot of chords are made of skips. 1, skip this note, 3, skip this note, 5. It even matches up with the fingering in the right hand. So that G chord, notice when I move my hand, I don't even move my fingers. It's in a locked position. So if I keep it locked and focus on my thumb going to G, these 2 notes, the B and the D, should automatically fall into place. So the G chord is the 5 chord. Underneath it, that V is a Roman numeral 5. So you can guess that a 1 chord is built off the first note of the scale. A 5 chord is built off of the 5th note of the scale. And remember, we just did the scale. What was the 5th note? So if I go back to that second line, and I'll even do the same fingering with both hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The 5th note is a G. So I've got my C chord. C's that 1 note. And remember, G is the 5 note, which, by the way, you're playing with your pinky finger when you play the C chord. So when I go from the C chord, my thumb is going to go where that pinky was. And that's our G chord. And on the second measure, you're going to come right back down to the C chord. So the way to make it work, once again, is locked position. Now, don't tense up and get tight, but don't contract or expand the fingers, and you should be okay. Just nice and slow. Take your time. Same thing with left hand. 5, 3, and 1 is our fingering, but it's still C, E, and G. Your pinky finger is going to go here where your thumb is, because that's G for the G chord. So locked position. There's my G chord, and I'm going to go right back to C. Once you get those hands separate, hands together. Now make sure hands together, you play both chords at the same time. You don't want this. They got to be as 1. And if you got to take a lot of time to move up, that's okay. You want to wait as long as it takes and then hit both chords. So really, ignore the rhythm at first. You got to get your chords solid. And what I want to recommend you do is not move one hand and then the other. You certainly don't want to be holding down a C chord when you move one. You want to leave both chords at the same time and move the hands at the same time. So your hands need to work together in sync when you're doing this. 4 beats again in a measure. So you got half notes and then whole notes. So let's go nice and slow. 1, 2, ready, go. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And again, even at that slow pace, that's not easy. So again, what I recommend is really break this down. Make sure your hands release together. Make sure they move to the G chord together, and then play. That kind of focus, you're just going to have to not count. But eventually, as you practice more and more back and forth, you can start to slowly apply the count. So if you've not done this before, this will take some time. This is not easy. Now, the next 2 measures, it says common tone. In a way, this is easier because you're not having to jump. Now, what's common tone? Well, remember earlier, when you play the C chord, I said the C chord has a G, and when you went to the G chord, it also has a G. So a common tone is the same note in 2 different chords. And sometimes you can have 2 of the same notes in 2 different chords. Now you can't have 3 of the same notes because then it'd be the same chord. So the common tone between the C chord and the G chord was the G. Now here's what's very interesting. On the second half of this 3rd measure, it says G7. And then underneath that, it says 5-7. So here's what that means. These books don't explain it, but I'll take a moment to explain it. Here's your G chord. This was root position. And by the way, I don't think I even explained what root position means. That means if I play a C chord, the C's at the bottom. Think of a plant. The bottom of a plant is the root. So you're putting your C at the bottom, root position. The G chord, your G's at the bottom. But for this G7, the G is not at the bottom. Here are the notes for the G7. B, F, and G. B is at the bottom. The G is actually at the top. So it's been flipped around, it's been inverted. Now the G is still the root, but it's at the top, okay? So it's not root position. All right, so what makes a G7 chord different than a G chord? I'm gonna go back to root position on the G. What makes a G chord is simple, G, B, and D. What makes a G7 is it's actually a 4-note chord, G, B, D, and F. Now F is 7 notes up from G. So you've got a G, and then add this note 7 notes up from the G. You have a G7. It's a 4-note chord. That also means you have to adjust your fingering to play all 4 of those. Now this is in root position because G's at the bottom. But what if I flip it and put B at the bottom? So all I have to do is actually put the G up here at the top. Okay, but I've got to rearrange all those notes. So if I flip the G up here, I'm going to take it away down there. So it's B, D, B, D, F, and G. But obviously I'm going to change my fingering here to get it with one hand. B, D, F, and G. Okay, still with me? Because this is a lot of information. You don't have to know this, but people ask, so I figure why not. Now, I'm going to play that down an octave. I'm going to move down here, B, D, F, and G, because this is where this is written. Now you're thinking, yeah, but you're playing 4 notes and there's 3 notes. There is a rule. The 5th of a G7 chord, the 5th of any 7th chord can be omitted. And that would be this note, the D. So now we're left with B, F, and G. So we've done 2 things to that G7 chord. We've inverted it, and we removed the 5th, which is a D. You're thinking, how's that the 5th? That looks like it's the 2nd note of the chord. Let me go back one more time to G7 in root position. This is the 1st, 3 notes up from that is the 3rd. 5 notes up from a G is the 5th, which is the D. So I'm going to eliminate the 5th. And remember, we said the F is 7. So I can also play it this way. G, B, and F. Invert that. Put the G up here. I've got B, F, and G, which is what we're playing down here. B, F, and G. All right. Now, if you're still lost and confused, don't worry about it. It's a lot of information, and the book doesn't explain it one bit. But for those curious, you know, what's the difference between a G and a G7 chord? There's your answer. Now, all these lessons, we will have these 7 chords, so it'll get brought up again. All right, so the whole point of this, though, is common tone. C chord. Let's go back to that. Now, when I play the G7 chord in that inversion, guess what? The G stays right there. So instead of this up to here, which doesn't even sound great, it's not even a smooth sound, this sounds smoother. And I don't even have to jump on the piano. I can just stay right there. So that's the C chord going to the G7 in first inversion. And back to the C chord. We'll do the same in the left hand. You've got your C chord, your G7, B, F, and G. And definitely pay attention to your fingering. This is important fingering for both hands. So the C chord in both hands, definitely got to have that 3 on the E. When you go to the G7, in the right hand, it's that 4th finger that's going to be on F. In the left hand, make sure it's that 2nd finger on F. Okay, and then when you go back to your C chord, make sure it's the 3rd finger on E. So let's put those 2 measures together with a slow count off. 1, 2, ready, go. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And like I said on the previous 2 measures, take your time with this. Take your time. Make sure everything lines up. Hit all the notes together first. Then eventually you can put in the count. Go as slow as you need to for accuracy. And then if you want, you can play the entire line straight through. You don't have to. There's two lines at the end of measure 2, and those aren't the that doesn't mean it's like the end of the what am I trying to say? That doesn't mean it's the end of the line. The end of the line, you have a double bar line at the very end. But that kind of just means it's dividing the 2 sections when you have 2 lines like that at the end of measure 2. So really these are two different things, but you can play the whole line through if you want. Doesn't matter. Lastly, at the very bottom, arpeggio. So an arpeggio is a broken chord that is ascending across the piano and descending. There's tons of ways to play arpeggios and even tons of fingering. This is just one of many, many, many ways, but very typical for beginners. So what we're actually doing our arpeggio on is a C chord. They don't even tell us that, but if you look at the notes, your very first measure in the left hand is a broken C chord. C, E, and G. Beats 1, 2, and 3. So we're in 3/4 time for this. The second measure, you're doing it in the right hand. C, E, and G. So when we do that pattern, starting in the left hand and then following it in the right hand, this is an arpeggio. We're playing broken chords up the piano. Now here's an interesting thing. At measure 3, notice it says LH above that C. So that's your left hand. Your left hand is actually going to cross over your right hand, and it's your 2nd finger that's going to hit this C. So basically what you're doing is you're playing an arpeggio across 2 octaves, starting on C down here. Here's 1 octave, and here's the 2nd octave we just concluded. Now, you don't want to do this and then move your left hand. You notice as I was playing it, I was actually moving my left hand while my right hand was playing. You definitely want to practice that, because if you wait and then move it, too late, right? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. I was too late. So you want to be moving that left hand over while the right hand's playing, so you're right there and you don't interrupt the steady tempo. Now again, go as slow as it takes, but it's got to be steady. So you can go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. So I'm right there. So you can move your hand ahead of time. As soon as I hit middle C, I can go right there. Or you can move it slowly. As long as you're there just before or earlier on beat 1 of measure 3, you're good. What happens after you hit that C is you're coming right back down in the right hand on that G. So your right hand's not going to move at all in this example. So you're just coming right back down. But look what happens on beat 2 of the 4th measure. My thumb in the left hand has to come to this G, and it's got to be there right on beat 2. So after I play that C up there and I'm playing my right hand, I've got to move my hand in the left hand and be ready to go without interruption to the steady beat. So once again, the pattern is your left hand, C, E, G, right hand, and your left hand's moving, and then you're right there. But as soon as that right hand plays again, your left hand thumb is on G. So the movement for the left hand is 2 on this C, thumb on that G. Once again, 2 on this C and 1, which is thumb, on that G. Once you get the movement down, just like the chords above it, don't worry about the steady tempo just yet. Once you get that movement down and you feel like you can go slow and steady, start doing a count off. So 1, ready, go. 1, 2, 3. Because you have the dotted half note at the end. So again, take your time, go very, very, very slow. Your goal though, and as you practice these, hopefully you practice a little bit of this every day. Your goal though, eventually, which would come naturally if you practice it every day, is you can get to this point where it's just a nice, smooth, fluid motion, much faster. And it potentially could go even faster than that, but it has to be smooth, has to be accurate, has to be steady. All right, so that covers page 2, C major. So take your time with this. Like I said, don't rush it. And the nice thing about this book is every lesson after this will follow the exact same format. It's just in a different key. And so what that means is as we get into more keys, we're going to start adding some more black keys, our sharps, and eventually our flats. So that does make it, a little more tricky, but the concepts are exactly the same. So that's why I recommend spend a lot of time on page 2. That'll actually help for the rest of the book. All right, so again, any questions, comments, please feel free to leave them in the box below, and I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson.